Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be, and whether you're watching live or archived. And welcome to episode number 95 of Nautel's Transmission Talk Tuesday webinar series. Today's a weird one for me because we're leaving the transmitter site and going to the other end of the STL. And anybody that knows me knows that when you get to that end, my knowledge level goes way down. So as always, I found somebody smarter than me to talk to. And this week, it happens to be Adam Robinson, who is, I'm going to look at the title and get it right, VP of Corporate Operations for DJB Radio. Did I get it right, Adam?
Close enough. I usually don't use the corporate part, but,
So also,
guy who does stuff is usually my title.
So we're also going to give Adam a happy birthday shout out. He hit a milestone mark yesterday. He's 30 in his head and 40 on real life, and something totally different on his driver's license, but that's okay. We're not even going to count it. He's still younger than me, and that's all that matters. No, Elaine, I'm no cold, but I am hiding in Ed's office, so the acoustics here are not quite what they are at the the sound studio in Casa de Welton, if you will. Not that those are a lot better, but yeah, we're going to blame it on Ed's microphone. And that's my excuse to give the other shout out to Mr. Disembodied Voice, Ed Sylvester, who did lend me the use of his office for today. And a shout out to, I see one of the guys from Summit Technology Group is attending remotely, and the rest of them are upstairs for a training course. So it's just kind of a busy week here at Nautel, which is better than being bored. All right, mandatory preamble while we get things rolling. Anybody who's attended one of these before already knows that we do make these as interactive as possible. So you've got the ability to type in questions. They will show up on the screen in front of me, and I will absolutely bring them in, like I did with Elaine asking about the creaky. Not having a cold, but it was minus 17 Celsius here this morning, so pushing 0 Fahrenheit for those that don't speak in official temperature degrees. Anyway, let's see, John's saying hello from Alaska, and John's in Fairbanks, I believe, so I'm pretty sure that it's...
Bet you it's colder there.
1.3 Fahrenheit. Actually, it's not too far off where we are. Hey to Mark Boris, and shut up, Elaine. Elaine says it's 65 Fahrenheit in Tucson. So yeah, we all get to be jealous of Elaine. So definitely ask the questions. Also, don't forget that if you're an SPE member and you are maintaining certification records for renewing your certification, that the Nautel webinars do qualify for half of a research point under category I of the research schedule. So spreadsheet, notepad. Adam, you're a new SPE member as of last year, right?
Yeah, last year I finally, pulled the cord, and now I'm on 2 committees. So
that's how it works. You volunteer for something. Well, see what happens. You ask a question, and they absolutely. It's like you ask the question, you volunteered for the committee. Let's see, John. Did you know they put an 8 a.m. on the clock now? Oh yeah, you're retired. Yeah, I vaguely remember something happening this morning at dark 30. All right, so we covered all that stuff. Don't forget, like I said, we do handle the questions or comments, criticism. If the sarcasm is really good, I'll bring that in as well. We did do advanced questions. I saw Vaughn on the attendee list, so we're going to tag him up first. But the question on XPN AM. And XPN is an Orban processor, which we use a lot with our AM transmitters because of the modulation density we can get out of it to drive MDCL harder. So it increases the power savings on MDCL. So yeah, it's going good and seems to work well. I mean, the harder you hit MDCL, the harder it drives the algorithm, the lower the power bill gets. Now, as with all things, mileage will vary, and signal to noise at the fringe is going to be impacted. You can't make the signal smaller and have it go further, but that's, it's a trade-off. David asked about getting the most out of RDS from your Nautel transmitter with DJB automation, and this would be a good general answer for almost any transmitter and any automation, but I'm going to defer to the expert, the guy from Away with the Briefcase.
Okay, well, thanks, Jeff. Any automation system can provide you with artist and title information, and certainly DJB does that as well. We can speak directly to any RDS encoder using an ASCII field or an ASCII stream through IP. Mostly we do XML files because that has sort of been the standard for many years. People are looking for things to be a little bit faster now, so we're moving with the times and going to IP. But if you really, really want to maximize use of RDS, especially when talking about HD, we always recommend getting a third party in there like Rapid or Q, where you can really open up a whole new toolbox of things to provide more than just artist and title information and now artwork. You can tell people what's going on. You can tag things. Another avenue for that that has become very popular of late is added value for your radio advertisers, which is essentially using the artist and title field on the piece of audio, their commercial, to provide additional information through RDS, phone numbers, websites, specials. I mean, you're limited to a certain number of characters, so you don't want to get too carried away with that. But that's something that we've seen a lot of our customers doing lately.
Yep. And I mean, that I've run into that. There's umpteen different, you'd mentioned with Rapid and Q, and of course, Enco had Patapult. I don't know if they still make it, but something like that. The folks over at Summit have Postscript. There are a bunch of different options, software and some hardware, like does Automat still make their RDS encoder? I know Innovonics makes one, so there's some hardware options too. A lot of the software does lend itself to being, like you said, a little more flexible when it comes to adding custom messages. So,
it's another task, and we have to keep that in mind when looking at trying to getting added value, adding things to RDS or anything else that we do. There's always going to be the need for a human being to intervene from time to time. So, before you go and build yourself a house of cards trying to put too many things into RDS, or you're now playing streaming info, it's important to make sure that you're being cognizant of the fact that somebody's going to have to police it.
yeah. And give a shout out. William Harrison put Meta Radio from Media Realm in the comments, and so Ed, I'll get you to copy that URL and throw it up in the chat where everybody can get to it. Let's see. Chris asked if there's a way to get to get the Nautel RDS API data format, so those of us that can send data directly to the RDS encoder. And yeah, I mean, we use DPS, dynamic postscript, and text equals for radio text. But there is, and it's gotten better, the VX transmitter operations manual is the first one I've seen that does a decent job of explaining the formatting we need. So Chris, I'll send you a link to that. But if you go to our website under the support tab on the right, and then under technical resources, look for technical manuals. And I say the VX series operations manual is the one that seems to have done the best job of it so far. Prior to that, we just basically listed fields, and you were all kind of on your own. So it's improving. It's definitely a learning curve for us too. Now, I'm going to say that this, what we're discussing here today, Adam, kind of, like you said with the communities, I mean, you volunteer for something and the next thing you know, that becomes your career, which has worked well for me for 30 odd years. But Adam did this presentation for the Canadian SPE chapter, our virtual chapter, 4 or 5 months ago. Something like that.
Yeah, it was back in the fall for sure.
Yeah, and so I kind of said, hey, that made audio something that an RF guy can understand. Would you do it again? And so that's where the idea is. So this is Adam's slide deck. So I'm going to let him mostly talk to it, but these are the topics as a rule.
Yeah, so just to give everybody a little bit of my background, I am a broadcast engineer. I spent 20 plus years working in the trenches, everything AM, FM, studio stuff, streaming. I earned my, I earned my stars, if you will. But one of the things that I've always been involved in is radio automation, going back to when I was in college, and Ron Paley dropped off a media touch system at my college back in the early 90s, and we had to figure out how to put it together. So automation has kind of been my touchstone. It's been the thing that has been the focal point of my career. So I wanted to put together a little presentation for everybody just to sort of demystify some of the automation things, but also to provide some tips and tricks just from a career of working in automation. And I'm also a bit of an audiophile. Don't hold me to that. I'm not going to tell you what my home stereo system is and whether or not, I actually, pay attention to trends in consumer audio. But it's important to remember when you're looking at your station, and this is going to be very, very radio centric. Some of these principles apply to TV, but this is mostly radio and audio in general. Garbage in, garbage out. That was one of the first lessons I learned from my instructor at Centennial College back in the early 90s. And it applies to just about everything, and it especially applies to audio. If you put noisy, lousy audio into a system, you're going to get even more amplified, noisy audio out of a system. Getting ready for this presentation today, I was reminded of one of my first jobs was for an ethnic AM radio station, and they didn't have any limiting. And there were different producers for every hour. It was brokered time. People were constantly coming and going, and they thought, louder was better. And, the more red lights they saw in the console meant the louder it was going to be on the air. And yes, it was. And at the time, the little 2 kilowatt transmitter, the forward power meter, looked like a VU meter. So it was kind of my first foray into processing audio and trying to figure out how to make a consistent sound for everything. So
that's why I jumped back over to the advanced questions, because between Mark, Bill, and Jerry, all three of them kind of addressed the same concept.
Yeah, so same audio processing for AM and FM. FM stations sound awful. Well, you can't process everything the same. You have to start with one sort of guiding principle, which is at the start, and where the audio comes from, you need to make sure that there's a standard in place. Are we processing it? Are we not processing it? If we are processing it, are we processing it consistently? And I'm talking at the studio end, at the microphone end, or when it comes to produced audio, running it through your DAW, and how much processing gets put onto it. You can't process AM and FM stations the same way. Lord knows I tried once when my AM processor gave up and I had to stick an Optimod 8100 on an AM station. It does not function the same way as AM processing. So processors are relatively inexpensive these days. There's lots of different things on the market. So if you have influence over that, I would highly recommend making sure that you have an AM processor for an AM station, an FM processor for an FM station, and an HD processor for an HD signal, which is critical as well, because there's so many different. I mean, you don't have to you don't have to be a Rhodes Scholar on this. FM and HD have different properties, so very important to make sure that those get split up. Now, having said that, you can influence that from the production stage. You can influence that from the studio side of things by not over processing what's coming out of your studios. The Boss Jock sound of the 70s that was so important. Everybody had to be loud and big and mean sounding, and everything had to growl. That doesn't exist anymore.
You're listening to Jeff and Adam on Nautel Radio.
Yeah, exactly. And the days of that heavy processing to be the loudest station on the dial are long gone. And now we're finding, and I have a lot of customers who come to me to talk about this, where they're producing audio that's not just going to a traditional broadcast final stage. They're producing audio for podcasts. They're producing audio for YouTube. They're producing audio for Spotify. They're producing audio for, for even just a webinar like this. So if you start simply and with just sort of with an ear to making sure that things sound consistent, then let the final stage processing deal with the output.
And that's kind of something that I beat that drum on Audio Chain as a whole, is consistency is key. You can make it good or bad pretty easily if it's consistent. But if you don't have, and the one thing I beat the drum on is levels. Keep your levels, like, have a reference all the way across the board. It just makes it so much easier to control and figure out what's going where. And then at that point, you split it off. And if you want the stream to go through a low bit rate processor, like something with perceptual coding for low bit rate, or for HD secondaries, as opposed to your primary where you might want to add a little more compression. So yeah.
Well, and the other thing too is that you let the processors do the work. One of the questions that was on your slide there, the pre-presentation questions, was about music being brutally overproduced when it comes out of the music factories these days. Yes, absolutely it is. I did a presentation for our local AES chapter about this almost a decade ago. And actually got into a very robust discussion, including somebody who was on the phone who had produced the piece of audio that I was not speaking fondly of, and trying to get them to explain to the group why it was that things were so bit crushed and so overdone. And the answer is that they want it to sound like it does on the radio everywhere. So
Right.
when, it used to be that the end use of music was radio, or it was home consumer media, albums, cassettes, CDs. But now in the streaming era, people are listening on a variety of different speakers and headphones, and sometimes it's going to be really compressed, and sometimes it's not going to be compressed, and sometimes it's going to be coming through a 3-inch speaker, and sometimes it's going to be coming through a symphonic sound system. So it's really hard for them to try and find a consistent level of processing to put on the final product that comes out of their studio. So they've always defaulted to that big ballsy radio sound. It's too much. It's just too much for everything. Dynamic range is something that has been completely lost in the digital era. So to go back to the root of that question, back in the old days when we were working with analog technology, there were hard limits on things. I mean, it's not to say that there aren't hard limits in digital, but you've got a hell of a lot of more headroom than you used to with analog stuff. If you overdrove any portion of an analog audio chain, you were going to inject distortion, and it would take you forever to go figure out where that distortion was coming from, because it could just be, half a dB of noise being injected, or raising the noise floor just a little too much and bringing in that noise. So you had to be very careful to make sure that every piece of the chain was properly balanced. One of the first things that I did in a radio station was I went through with a tone generator and an oscilloscope, and went through every channel on an old McCurdy console, and went through the whole processing chain, and went through all of the STL out all the way to the transmitter side, just to make sure that everything looked like, had the right shape and had the right curve, and that everything was set properly to a certain dynamic range. These days, who knows? Digital VU meters are just a reference of whatever's being played out of that device, and they can be affected even by Windows itself. So there's not a common reference point anymore. So if you're working in a digital environment, digital is digital is digital. So when it comes to levels, try and find a consistent, a consistent level, or at least put something, not necessarily an analog VU meter, but something of that nature on your output stage before it goes into a processor, before it goes into a transmitter, to make sure that you're at least getting close to a reference level that you're looking for out of your studio. Otherwise, it's just going to be the Wild West, and things are going to be all over the place. But trying to actually, pinpoint how, in what we see as being an analog world, especially those of us that have been in the business as long as Jeff and I have, we're still thinking about everything being in terms of, how does it look on a VU meter? Well, it doesn't work that way anymore, because, RMS has become a bigger issue than peak audio, and digital processing changes the scale every time that it runs through another step in digital. So the answer is there's not an answer. the way to go about checking to make sure that you have a reference at the end of the day, like I say, is just to throw an old VU meter, some sort of test equipment, even a scope, just on the output of your audio chain, and you'll see very quickly what stuff is overproduced, what stuff is underproduced, what's too loud, what's too quiet.
Right. And I mean, that could, in the AES world, come back to putting something, the current equivalent of a bit buddy on there just to see what your DBFS is at. Marco mentions when he first started in broadcasting, he was taught that the audio chain should be flat response from studio to transmitter. And I'll qualify that with, you're going to, for example, on the transmitter, you got pre-emphasis that's going to impact it to an extent. So, you have to allow for that as well. But yeah, flat response isn't a bad concept. However, you are going to have some peculiarities introduced at every step of the chain. What do you think?
Yeah, and I mean, if I were to, sit here and spend an hour telling you how I used to build an air chain, or how I would build an air chain today and what I used to do differently, we could be here for hours while we debated, which piece of gear was the best piece of gear and which reference level was the best reference level. Marco was correct. We used to try and flatten everything out as best we could, but a lot of that had to do with the delivery systems. If we were flattening everything out, it was because we were trying to run it through an equalized radio circuit, like a 15K or an 8K circuit through, the phone company, or we were running it through an early STL. I think of the old Harris and Marty's that ran on the 450 band. You just didn't have the bandwidth to be able to put a lot of dynamic range through there. So you wanted to make it as much of a sort of a tunnel as possible, as tight a little tube that was going through to get to the other end, and then let your processing bring it all back to life and make it all sound great. You can't really do that with digital. In DBFS, yes, it is a reference level, but it's going to be different on any device that you look at. Your phone is going to be different from your computer, is going to be different from, even a digital processor, or any box that adds any sort of DSP to your signal throughout the chain is going to change that reference level. So I'm not a physicist. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I know more about this than I do, but I can tell you from experience that, again, the easiest way to go about it is applying those old analog principles to it, which is flatten it out as much as you can, and then, get it to the final output stage. Me personally, I like a little bit of curve on microphones just to take down some of the highs and lows. It doesn't have to be a lot of EQ involved. I like to make sure that anything that's leaving a studio has at least some dynamic compression to it. Something as simple as like 2-to-1 at -18, just something like that, just to give it a little bit of a shape as it's coming out of that studio before it gets to the rest of the air chain. After that, don't mess with it. Send it to the processor, let the processing handle the final change, or final stage rather. Especially for FM processors, all of the major brands of FM processors out there are now doing look ahead limiting. It adds a bit of delay, but who cares, because we're running everything on digital, codecs out to the transmitter sites now. We're not really using analog. Nobody's listening to their air feed in their headphones anymore, much to the chagrin of some of the guys that I used to work with. But you're, because you're injecting a little bit of delay along the way, it's okay to let that look ahead limiter do the work that it's supposed to be there, because it's going to say, hey, that piece of audio has already had all of this done to it. I'm just going to pass it as is. I don't need to add anything to it. I'll just AGC it, but I'm not adding any, dynamics or EQ to it.
Right. And John mentioned in the comments, try to get a program producer to tell you what 0VU is in a DBFS world.
Who knows? I mean, my closest point of reference for that has always been about -8. DBFS is around 0VU, but when you take digital compression into account, and when you take RMS, when you're looking at RMS and not just peak level, then yeah, it's a crapshoot. I mean, Hey, don't let the lights go too far into yellow is about what I tell people.
There you go. And so swinging back into automation, you did have a...
Sorry, you got me started on audio processing, man. If you want to talk about automation, then ask me questions about automation.
I just stripped the transmission and left the car sitting on the side of the highway. Let's roll. But so yeah, I mean, there are some general guidelines that you want to follow regardless of what we're talking about, as far as getting the audio from point A to point B without totally destroying it.
Yeah, so let's talk about broadcast automation a little bit, which, again, is the topic that Jeff brought me in here to talk about primarily today. So automation is something that is standard now. It's not, you're not going to go into a lot of radio stations and find, no automation system. You're not going to find people running stuff live 24/7, 365. If you do, it's because they're doing it deliberately. We're the live 24/7 station. We're the station that's, gone and thrown out our computers and dragged record players back in. We're doing it old school. But even at that, there's still going to be computers in there to run spots and imaging and all those things. Nobody's bringing back cart machines. So automation is there to provide 24/7 audio and control for your system. It's the heart of your system. The four key aspects of an automation system are scheduling, production, logic, and playout. So scheduling, putting the logs together, adding music, adding traffic, adding all of your other surveillance and other elements that need to go into the system. Production, actually producing the audio. Obviously, if you're a music station, then the music's going to come pre-produced, but everything else you have that goes to air has to be produced. Logic, the ability for the system to be able to, talk to an AOIP system or an analog switcher to be able to switch between different sources for satellite programming, perhaps, or for network programming. Network programming is huge in the industry right now. I don't need to tell everybody who's listening that is the case. So logic is one of the key components, and then playout, just the actual playback of the audio for your station. A good system should be able to run unattended or with minimal input and maintenance, and I think that's fair to say for everything. And that used to be a goal that we tried to achieve so that we had more time to work on other things, but now it's just become the primary need, because there are so many stations out there that are running either on shoestring budgets or as a satellite of some bigger operation. And that goes for smaller broadcasters all the way up to the biggest broadcasters in the world. It's just the economy of the industry now. So your system should be able to run without having a lot of intervention. Radio automation, having said that, shouldn't replace people. It should be used as a tool to make better content. When we made that transition from playing live media to running automation, everybody, and voice tracking killed the radio announcer, and automation took jobs away from operators. Well, only in places where they couldn't afford to pay those people. For everybody else, it became a tool that allowed us to spend more time either preparing better bits or to be able to connect with the audience in different ways, especially when social media became the place that we all connect. The automation system became a tool for being able to give you extra time to be able to connect with people through social, through video, through all the different Instagrams and Facebooks and whatnot. So seeing it as the enemy is an old-fashioned idea that has to be put out with the cart machines that it replaced.
Well, and beyond that too, I mean, the big thing for us, and I mean, most folks know that in my infinite spare time, I help out a little with a community radio station down here. We've got 35 hosts. The good thing is that since they're all volunteers, the payroll is not so much an issue for us. But I mean, the automation allows them the flexibility to, do I record my stuff from home and dump it into the system? Do I play my 1 a.m. show? Do I record it at 3 p.m. when I'm actually awake and conscious? So again, it's more about power and flexibility in that regard.
Which brings me to the next point on that slide, is that the same people that are using that system have to understand what it does and why it's there. Having a little bit of knowledge about how automation actually works and the steps that it takes to put something together is key to making people understand that, yes, it does give you a little bit of extra flexibility, but it doesn't mean that you can be, hands off all the time and just let the computer do everything. You kind of have to, do a little bit of both. And the last point that I make on that slide about automation principles is the computers work for us. It's not the other way around, right? So we have to be the ones driving the bus. We have to be the ones using those tools that we are provided to make better radio, not just letting the computers do everything for us and then blaming them when something goes wrong.
You ever seen Maximum Overdrive?
It's one of my favorites. I still have nightmares about that truck.
Let's see.
Every time I hear Hell's Bells by AC/DC, I duck.
Vaughn mentions in the questions, AM receiver quality has marched backwards. Many of the complaints I hear back from our ops team are from listeners who expect miracles from the receivers. Heard some folk indicate the audio bandwidth on the processor should no longer be out to 9 kilohertz as it is in South Africa, as it makes no difference. And
Well, do
that's
we want to just stop talking about automation and start talking about AM stereo?
we may be, and that's one of those. Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. If the car receiver's only going out to 3.5, why would you process to 9? But on the other hand, there are still folks listening on decent home stereos that do get
Name
some.
two.
I'm one.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'd be the other.
There you go.
This is not a good group to be asking that question.
Right. Now, here's a question. You said audiophile. Do you have oxygen-free IP cables?
Oh, absolutely. And I have I have the finest gold-plated connectors on all of my speakers. The thing about AM, and it's funny that comes up because that's a topic that I deal with a lot, like you, and like a lot of guys in the industry who made the transition from broadcast engineering into the vendor space. I still work with a community station in my home market of Toronto, and it's a little AM station, and again, a lot of volunteers, and yeah, the notion that you can get better quality AM by trying to expand the bandwidth is a complete misnomer, because you simply can't. You still need to process for 5 kilohertz. Yeah, most of the processors are going to be looking at 8 kilohertz spectrum, but you need to be smart enough to know that what you want to do is just drive it all into the middle and not worry about trying to create, the breadth that you get out of FM or HD.
Right. Now, and I mean, having said that, HD on AM in an all digital world does sound pretty good.
Sounds fantastic.
But
it sounds fantastic. I wish more stations would adopt it. But then again, we get into the argument about receivers, and I know that Congress just passed a bill to put AM, to keep AM in the dashboard. But is that AM HD, or is that just traditional AM?
So we'll see where that ends up. So networking.
Okay. So to borrow that line from The Offspring, you got to keep them separated. One of the things that happened somewhere along the way with broadcast automation, and with just about anything in a station environment, was we went from having discrete networks for everything because they had to be closed networks. Back when we were talking about 4-base T and everything running on coax, and we used to have those, you remember those little 50 ohm bullets that you had to put on the end of it so that the network didn't leak out. Put a closed loop on it so it didn't spill out on the floor. Once we started getting into structured LAN cabling and structured LAN networks within buildings, we started using what was there. And that became, and that continues to be a problem for a lot of installations. And one of the reasons that there's been a significant change even in the last 10 years is because we went from everything being compressed audio to being uncompressed audio. And it's a heck of a lot of more bandwidth that we have to use to be able to move all those wave files around. So if, somebody sent 50 pages to the printer and that's on the same network as your broadcast automation, or, somebody's downloading a 4-hour, documentary show that's going to air on Saturday, and it slows down your entire network speed and bogs everything down, then your automation system's going to react to that, and you're going to start getting product on the air. You're going to get jitter. You're going to have problems. So it's really important to borrow a page from our friends at AOIP, whether that be Wheatstone or Axia or SAS or Logitech. We need to look at it from that standpoint, that it's critical to make sure that we keep that infrastructure separate so that we're not running it across just any old LAN connection that's there. This is something that people seem to forget, is that automation is the heart of your broadcast, and without it you have nothing to put on the air except for somebody talking into a microphone. So it's really important that you're doing everything that you can to make automation as good as it can be. We've spent a lot of time developing around people using bad networks or bad hardware or bad hard drives, but the truth of the matter is you need to invest in it just like you would in a transmitter.
And that's so John makes the comment that VLAN shares the physical bandwidth. And that's the one thing that a lot of folks get I guess, kind of wrapped up in is you can partition everything and separate everything beautifully, but you're still limited to the size of the pipe coming into the building.
Well, and things have changed. I mean, everything's constantly moving forward and everything's moving faster. And I think if we get to the sort of global networking slide, I think that's my next slide. You'll see. Yeah, there we go. The days of DSL connections and low bandwidth wired connections are gone. We're looking at fiber now, and fiber everywhere. Fiber in the studio, fiber at the transmitter site, fiber at your remote voice track home location. So the amount of bandwidth that you have between sites has increased significantly, but we may not have adapted the LAN to match the WAN. And what I mean by that is, 10100 resources may still be on your network, and you don't know that they're there dragging speeds down. That could be old printers. It could be other old peripheral devices. Heck, it could be that old file server that still runs the old traffic program that they use once in a while to go back and check and see whose spot they ran 15 years ago may have a 10100 network adapter in it that's just going to slow the overall speed of the system down. So,
could be an old Netgear switch hiding in a corner somewhere. Yep. John mentions get rid of Cat 5 non-E cable, and yep, same deal. I mean, you're limited by cable bandwidth.
Yeah, I mean, the last time I went looking for, for LAN cables for a project, we're beyond Cat 6 now. They're already starting to spec stuff like Cat 8, which I mean just increases the bandwidth, but we're still moving stuff over copper. If you really want to make good networking decisions, you want to make good networking decisions, you want to make a good network, start looking at fiber resources, because it's really starting to become a standard as opposed to just being that expensive toy that we're never going to be able to afford. Start doing it now. Start doing uplinks and downlinks between switches using fiber. Don't use copper. Any place that you can squeeze in a fiber connection, do it. So moving along with the idea of networking here, VPN. A lot of people will fight with me about VPN, but as far as I'm concerned, it's a necessary evil. But use VPN by either using a provider that does it. That's their job. That's their raison d'etre, if you will. Make sure that they take care of the security for you. Don't get stuck having to deal with your own security, and don't get bogged down into a fight with your IT department about what's secure and what isn't secure. If there's encryption on the connection, that's all you need. You're not really punching holes in the firewall to be able to connect two sites together. You're creating a ring of protection that encompasses everything that's involved in your chain. Which brings me to the next point, which is, are we doing Pentagon or are we doing WAN peer? So anybody who knows how the Pentagon's design is designed in rings. So there's, as the rings get closer together, the security gets tighter and tighter. Are we, when we're connecting sites together, are we doing the Pentagon idea? Are we building security here and then having the outside contact here and then the furthest out contact here? It's really a choice that you have to make, but at the end of the day, and every time I do this presentation, this comes up, and I'm just going to throw it out there. The biggest issue facing any organization today is ransomware. Ransomware attacks. I mean, the old days of Trojan viruses and stupid little malware things that get into your system. I mean, people aren't really as concerned about that as they used to be. Now what you got to worry about is ransomware. And if somebody clicks that link, it doesn't matter how secure your system is, it's going to go everywhere. It's going to go everywhere.
In 2024, that was 82% of all ransomware attacks, 80-something%. It varies depending on your source. I'm going to give a shout out. I saw Wayne Pacina in the audience list, and he does an IT security course that uses a castle layout as the description, similar to your Pentagon, but talking about the different OSI layers and how you increase the security. Marco mentions putting a second NIC network interface card in a workstation that will access the automation while the primary NIC does all other traffic.
Yeah, I mean, you can do that too, but you're still limited.
You're segregating.
You're segregating them, but you're still limited by by Windows and what Windows can actually do and what kind of traffic it can do. I mean, the truth is that we can't isolate automation systems from the outside world like we used to. There
Yeah.
was a time where we're like, on-air machines don't go anywhere near the internet. Well, in our current economy and having to have everybody be able to work in the studio and work at home and work here and work there, chances are your on-air system is going to have to see the outside world. So, while I agree with Marco that separating the LAN from, office and automation, just like you would separate, office automation and AOIP, chances are things are going to be open to the outside world. So,
Yeah.
just a couple of other points about global security. Two-step is a pain, but it's an effective means of keeping your network secure. So if you have any external resources that are attaching to your network, make sure that there's two-step protocols in place. So it's not just as simple as typing in a simple, 8-character password and you can get access to the entire network. Remote contributors need to be treated like internal resources. So the example that I use is the person who does midday voice tracks for 6 radio stations in 6 different markets across the country. Well, don't just have them attach their computer to the internet and send you stuff. Actually bring them in, provide them the hardware, make sure that machine is secure, warn them that they're not allowed to use it for what they would normally use a computer for at home. And make sure that it's part of your VPN, which will help keep things safe. And finally, the outpost. If you want to prevent yourself from having a ransomware attack take down your entire network, the best thing to do is to air gap stuff. And transmitter sites are a great thing to air gap. Have backups that use cloud resources or use use handshake protocols to be able to send that backup. Don't just have it as part of the network. And then that way you've got a secure offsite backup. And finally, once a month, have somebody take a copy of your server state on a removable drive and take it home with them, or just take it, disconnect it from the network. I mean, fire prevention or flood prevention or whatever, and a lot of us have had to deal with that, obviously dictates that you should take that drive away from the site. But if you just get it off the network, then you're going to secure yourself from potential attack.
Right. And Mark mentions using whitelisting for incoming as well as VLANs. And yeah, to an extent, but again, you're putting some trust that whatever you've whitelisted is still pristine.
Well, and don't forget
99%, again, 80% of the time, somebody clicked that link. I'm a graduate of the Don't Click That Link Dummy PowerPoint presentation.
Sure. And I mean, we had a guy that worked for us for many, many years, an announcer who was, silky smooth pipes and was, I'll call him an elder of the business, who if a big flashing red button showed up on the screen that said, click here to annihilate yourself where you sit, then he would definitely push it. You can't prevent that from happening. You can't really protect yourself against that, but you have to be cognizant of the fact that the more security you put in and the more you attempt to secure your network, the more effort has to be put into maintaining that. And the more times you're going to get a call at 4 o'clock in the morning when somebody can't log in because, they don't have the encryption key, or they don't have the proper access, or they've been flagged because, there was IP traffic on their system that was, ran against some blacklist somewhere.
Or they, and not to mention any names, were in a panic trying to board an airplane, had to change the access code on their iPhone and then forgot what they changed it to, and typed it in wrong 3 times, and 3 strikes you're out. Now you got a formatted brick. But not that I would ever do that again. But it was a learning curve.
Well, and there's, let's take this outside of the realm of just automation, just talking about broadcast automation, and just talk about what we're up against as an industry. We need to be connected everywhere. We don't have the resources to be able to have somebody go out and monitor transmitter sites. We don't have the resources to have somebody go out and monitor remote studios. We need to be able to get telemetry and information from those places, as quickly as possible, so that you're not driving all over hell's half acre whenever you need to take transmitter readings or find out why something isn't working properly. So it's a double-edged sword that you are going to have some potential open issues on your network. You're going to have things that aren't 100% secured. It's just a matter of what's more important, getting the information or making sure that you've got Fort Knox around your studios and your transmitters.
And it's both scary and reassuring to know that 4 out of 5 times all your security is going to be irrelevant because somebody's going to click the link anyway.
Yeah. I mean, Exploits exist. People are still out there doing it, but they're doing it for money now. I mean, hacking used to be a thing to prove that you could do it, right? Hacking the Pentagon, hacking a big bank, hacking whoever, was just to prove that you could do it. Now it's all about money, and
Yeah.
it's all about, extracting money from you because you let somebody into your network. If you protect yourself in such a way that it doesn't matter, and I'm not going to suggest ever that if you have a ransomware attack in any facility that it doesn't matter, but if you've got a plan in place to be able to handle that, then it shouldn't be as big a deal as, okay, well, I guess we're going to have to write a check for $1 million or else we're never going to get back on the air.
Yep. And I mean, that's the ongoing thing. I really like on your hardware slide, the one I've got up here, that first line, talking about, different tool for the job, so to speak.
Yeah, so it's something that we talk to our customers about a lot. And again, you can apply a lot of these things that maybe just aren't necessarily, about automation. You can apply these to other aspects of any business, really. Servers are servers and workstations are workstations. Okay, so you don't need to have a server for every workstation, and you don't necessarily have to say this is a workstation, we can't use it as a server. But it's always good to differentiate between the two, because with things being so replaceable these days, there's a lot of e-waste out there. In fact, I just watched a great video from a guy who was talking about how much e-waste there's going to be with this Windows 10 end of life thing in September or October, I suppose. That we just have to accept that that's the way that the world goes. We're hoping that if we dispose of these things in the right place, they're going to get recycled, and the parts and pieces are going to be used somewhere else to build cars or water treatment facilities for third world countries.
Yeah.
So the differentiation is there, simply because when you are purchasing hardware, it's important to decide ahead of time where you want to invest your money. And I highly recommend investing money in servers, and workstations should be, you should assume that you're going to have to replace those workstations within half of their predicted lifespan, their life cycle. Favoring preferred spec over minimum spec. Any place that you go, you're going to get both. You're going to get both options. What is the difference between preferred spec and minimum spec? Preferred spec is something that's, a little bit faster and has a little bit more memory and maybe has a few more resources and is going to cost more money. But will it last longer? Probably not. Will it create fewer problems for you in its lifetime? Probably yes. So if you're looking at making an investment, and again, keep in mind that this is an investment that you're making, especially when we're talking about broadcast automation. This is an investment. It's not. This is a place where people always try to cut corners. They'll spend big money on transmitters. They'll spend big money on AOIP systems. They'll spend big money putting, flat panel monitors and LED lighting into a studio, and then they'll try and cut corners on automation. Automation is the thing that runs your radio station. So very important to differentiate between that. Don't overinvest though, buy extras, especially with workstations. If you have a specific platform for a workstation that you like, one of the things that DJB sells a lot of are these little mini cubes that we've been picking up over the last few years. They're inexpensive, but they're very powerful machines. And if you plan to have a few spares around and you've got the operating system ghosted and you've got, like you're using a Cronus or Macrim, something like that to be able to back up your operating system, then you should be able just to swap them out. Just see them as being peripheral devices as much as you would a microphone, a printer. Workstations should be at that level. They shouldn't be something, they're obviously mission critical at some point in their lifespan, but they also need to be considered something that's replaceable easily and virtually disposable.
And as an example, like with us, I mean, this laptop that I'm running this webinar on is just a stock Dell Latitude laptop. I mean, all of my customer management stuff is cloud-based, so I just load a browser and log in. If it blows up, gets stolen or lost while I'm on the road, I walk into a Best Buy, grab another laptop, and 30 seconds later, I'm at least to that level of functionality. I may not have my email, which requires some IT intervention to get going, but yeah. Tom makes a good point, and shout out to Tom McGinley out in the part of the world where it's colder than it is here.
Tom is a DJB customer, and we thank him for his patronage.
So anyway, you haven't mentioned anything about screen sharing apps for remote access. Too many simultaneous connections to an automation system can cause issues, and that's fair enough with whether you're talking like team viewer access or whether you're talking logging in remotely. There's again, the size of the pipe limits the amount you can do, and the size of the processor, et cetera, and so on.
Everything still needs to be managed. You know, like resources still need to be managed. Human resources need to be managed. Physical resources need to be managed. Everything needs to be managed. There needs to be somebody who's saying, okay, at this time of day, this person has access to a system, or at this time of day, that person has access to a system, and that's how you get around that. One of our customers in New York City, WBGO, listener-funded jazz station, fantastic group of people there, put a DJB system in just before the pandemic, and they were just using very simple remote control software. They were using TeamViewer to get into it, and they just had a schedule. You know, between 8 and 10, it was this person's time to be in the system, and from 10 to 12, it was this person's time to be in the system, and it worked out great, and they were still using it, and they had a hard time getting people to come back to the studios. So it's just a matter of managing those resources. Yeah, you can have too many people log in at the same place at the same time. Absolutely, you can bog down your network by having too many people accessing it at the same time, but it's just a matter of properly managing those resources and properly, divvying up the resources that are available to people. One last thing before we get off of the hardware page, because I think if you have my whole deck in there, then the operation stuff comes up later that would encompass what we just talked about in terms of managing resources. Plan for a replacement life cycle when you're buying. One of the mistakes that we see some of our customers make is they have a budget right now, and they're going to spend all of that money to put in everything that they need today. Think about what happens 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now, when you're going to have to go back to the well and ask for it. It's a lot easier to get that budget now, to have those replacements available to you, or to at least present your ownership group with a life cycle. So you're saying, okay, we're going to spend 50% of our budget now, and we're going to spend the other 50% of it over the next 3 years to make sure that we never find ourselves in a position where we have to do a wholesale change of absolutely everything at the same time.
Right.
And UPS units,
beyond automation, that philosophy should go from microphone to the top of the tower. The time to schedule or to start budgeting the replacement is the day you buy the new device.
Yeah.
So,
and UPS units, I mention this at every presentation that I do. UPS units are the key to everything. They're inexpensive. Make sure that everything has a UPS unit on it,
and make sure they're on a schedule for batteries.
Exactly. And laptops come with built-in UPS units, so don't discount them as potentially being workstations that we wouldn't traditionally see. If you have people who are working remotely a lot, providing them with a company-issued laptop cuts down on the amount of hardware that you need in two different places.
Yeah, I'm going to step in with a couple of things, a couple of questions. First off, we're 5 minutes-ish, 6 minutes to the top of the hour. We will run long. No surprise there. Anybody who's watched a TT before.
And if anybody's ever seen Weldon and I get going at a conference, you know that it can go on for hours.
So we won't keep you hours, but if I was guessing, it'd be somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 we'll have it wrapped. Vaughn asked cloud-based or actual server hardware, and that comes back to a tools for the job conversation and figuring out what you need to accomplish and what works for you, because there'll be times when either or both will be the answer.
One of the things that I preach to everybody in terms of cloud is to demystify it. Okay, let's remember that cloud has been such a buzzword for so many years. Cloud is not some magic place in the heavens where your data goes to live. It's a computer in somebody else's building. So if cloud is something that is important to your organization, so that you are not carrying both the physical load of having to maintain your own servers, or other sort of ancillary things like the amount of power that it costs to run those servers, or the number of people that you have to maintain those, then absolutely cloud makes sense. But you have to find an automation partner that's able to satisfy a need to have things in the cloud. DJB, we have a hybrid model. We can house some data in a cloud service or in a cloud server, so to speak, that allows you to be able to access that data from just about anywhere and use the local resources to connect to it. Or do you want your entire organization to be in the cloud? Well, that's a whole other story, because now you get into, you know, the never-ending argument about how do we stream audio back and forward between a cloud-based server and the end user. So cloud is something that is an important tool for backup. It also provides you a little bit of security, because a lot of cloud services that are simply there for backup are in fact air gapped, because, like I say, it's not a consistent connection. It's a handshake connection. So if the connection between those two things was ever broken, you're not going to have an open pipe to a cloud-based resource. So it's just a matter of preference, and it's a matter of what works for you.
Yeah. William also mentions that you've got the last line, don't forget your monitors, keyboards, and mice. And he mentions wireless keyboards and mice need replacement batteries, usually during the very late or very early shifts. And so here's a shout out for my particular mouse of choice, and I'm on my second one, is the Logitech MX Anywhere, because it's USB chargeable. So I can plug it in and use it as a wired mouse while it's charging. And I charge this one about once every 2 or 3 months, and it gets used 8 hours a day.
I get all kinds of questions from people who want to do radio on TV, and this raises an interesting topic. Radio on TV requires hiding a lot of wires. It requires hiding a lot of things that are just, you know, standard in a radio station, mic arms, you know, indicator lights, consoles, and all of the wiring that goes along with that. Sure, you know, go ahead. I mean, I tell people this. I say, you want to use a wireless mic? Fine, use a wireless mic. You want to use a wireless keyboard or a mouse? Go ahead and use it. But just like I would, you know, demand of anybody who was doing a live audio show, replace the batteries every day, and that's going to become expensive. You know, yeah. I started out even when I was in high school, working for an audio production company, and the first rule is that as soon as the kits are opened, the microphones get opened, the batteries come out of them and get thrown out immediately, and new ones go in. End of discussion. You know, we spent thousands of dollars on batteries for every you know, political conference or you know, business meeting that we tacked, because we had to. Yep. So if you want to do that, sure, but make sure that you're replacing those batteries on a weekly basis.
Right, or whatever schedule. Then, I mean, you may find the schedule by wearing them out once or twice and saying, oh, okay, need to go less than that.
Yeah.
Now, John mentions that if you're doing radio on TV, that well-managed wiring is a beautiful thing that should be shown off.
Sure, if you're an engineer, but if you're the program director or the brand manager, as they're calling them now, and I'm sorry to be sarcastic about that, but that always cracks me up, that title.
That's like content producer, but anyway.
Yeah, then you're, you know, then you don't want to see wires, and you don't want to see screens, and you don't want to see mics, and you don't want to see anything. All you want to see is talent, and then you have to remind them that this is radio primarily and not TV, and that's a whole other ball of wax.
Right. And Keith mentions, going back to the servers, for shoestring budget, what's better, cloud or your own server? And that's really not a question that can be answered, because, I mean, each comes with, I mean, cloud is an OpEx, it's a monthly bill. Your own server is a CapEx with a lower monthly bill, but still a monthly bill. So, you know, you got to figure it out yourself.
I think the not to stomp on you there, Jeff, but I think the answer that I would give people is it depends on whether or not you have the budget to maintain your own server, and whatever resources that you're using that server for, whether it be automation or you know, traffic counting, you know, domain services, whatever it may be. Is it something that's able to run in a cloud-based environment, or does it have to run on a local server? And if it has to run on a local server, then let's just be real about how much server you need, because a well-appointed Windows 11 machine will do most of the same networking that a server will do, and it'll do it for a heck of a lot less, and it's a lot easier to replace that box. So, you know, this is going to be one of those situations where I put the sign up, you know, tell me I'm wrong, and I'm going to sit back and have, you know, everybody that's on this call give us 10 different answers to that. But the truth is that it's all a matter of what you need that machine to do, answers that question for you, how much budget you have.
Yeah, and John mentions Raspberry Pi, but I mean, there are applications where that will do the job in a lot of cases. Maybe not a Raspberry Pi, but an Arduino or one of the little microcomputers that they're, $100 a pop for 1 inch chassis.
Well,
So,
I mean, and again, it all depends on what you're using. DJB in particular, we're very traditional. We have exe based programs on Windows machines. That's not to say that we don't have the ability to be a little more remote or resource light, but in a lot of cases, and something that we're definitely working towards, is the idea of application servers and then thin clients that connect to those application servers. So we may get to a point where we don't even need PCs. In front of a user, they may be able to use a tablet or they may be able to use something else. So I mean, again, it's all dependent on what systems you're using and what the goal of your organization is in terms of technology. Is it to make it as thin and light as possible and have everything maintained somewhere else, or do you still want to have some control over it?
right. And I mean, a lot of it too will come down again to user flexibility. Like I use my laptop for almost everything now just because I'm old and like the big size. But if I'm at home and don't want to dig out the laptop, I can run it on my phone and Chromecast it to my TV.
Yep.
So, there's a bunch of different options. Digital asset management. And again, this comes back to no matter what you're doing, if you don't audit it to the point where you know what you've got versus what you need to have, then you got no control.
Yeah, and this may be a good place for us to to kind of wrap up this discussion today. I know that this presentation, when I do it, as an hour-long presentation, is there's a lot more information to it. Unless there's anything else that you really want to touch on, I think we can spend some time here, because this is really one of the keys to broadcast automation. And again, with information and ideas in mind that apply to so many different aspects of any organization, and especially a broadcast organization. So when we talk about digital asset management, we're not just talking about where things live. We're not just talking about making sure that we've got backups in place. We're talking about the actual physical files themselves. And something that we run across all the time, and this is a real thorn in my side, is people have abandoned, just like we were talking at the very beginning of this webinar about audio quality, people have abandoned the responsibility of looking after their audio. It's there, and they can schedule cart number 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's going to play the Eagles Hotel California, and everybody's happy. But is that version of that song that's in your library, is it a good codec? Is it in a good format? Is it uncompressed? Is it compressed? How old is it? Has there been a remaster of it that might sound a little bit better? Do we want to dump the remaster and go back to the original 1976 master of that? There are a lot of questions that have to be taken into consideration when thinking about your audio. And one of the things that we run into a lot now is and this is something that's, smaller organizations certainly suffer from this. Bigger organizations change their formats and change over their audio so often that it's just somebody sends you a hard drive from headquarters and you put it on the air and you're done. But smaller groups and smaller organizations will have audio libraries and audio assets from a variety of different sources and different generations of audio encoding. Compressed versus uncompressed. Okay, well, let's crack open that nut and talk about it. The trend originally was compressed audio because, hey, we can make a 70 meg song 7 megs or 3.5 megs, and think about all the hard drive space that we're going to save, because hard drive space was very expensive 25 years ago. Fast forward to today, or even in the last 15 years, and hard drive space just isn't that expensive anymore. So everybody decided they wanted to start using uncompressed audio as part of their audio chain because it was going to quote unquote sound better. Okay, so again, going back to the early part of our conversation today where we were talking about audio processing, yes, if you start with uncompressed digital audio, then it's going to sound better, when it's being stepped on 3 times throughout your audio chain and then comes out a codec and pops out, and then there's even more digital processing in a lot of cases when it hits the transmitter stage now. So yes, an uncompressed audio is going to sound better. But if you have a compressed audio library, when's the last time anybody went to see what the vintage of those tracks are, and how many times have they been managed over the years? Because uncompressed can mean a whole bunch of different things. Now, there are a lot of compression formats out there. Even MP3 compression has gotten to a point where you can get away with using it if that is your point of compression. And why would you choose an uncompressed audio file over a compressed audio file? Because it's easier to move them around. It used to be about hard drive space. It used to be an economy of scale. Now it is about how much bandwidth you have. So if you're running uncompressed audio and you need to push that from, a cloud-based server is a great example, from a cloud-based server to an edge unit, and you're streaming that audio, it takes up a lot more bandwidth. And there's a lot more possibility for that to be slow, jittery, buffer, whatever, than a 5 or a 7 or a 10 meg compressed audio file like an MP3. So again, it's a matter of what makes the most sense for your organization. If everything is linear, and I don't mean that, that's a double entendre. I don't mean that simply as like linear audio. If your chain is linear and you have a server and you have a playout machine, and then the audio from that playout machine goes into your AOIP system, and then from there it goes into your air chain and it goes to the transmitter, then fine, you can use uncompressed audio all day long. But if there's any spot where that audio has to be pulled from a remote server to your on-air machine, or pulled remotely to an on-air machine from your home server, then you are going to run into a situation where you're going to run out of bandwidth if you're using uncompressed audio. So it's really a matter of just standardizing on one format, or in some cases, some customers are using a mix of both. If they know that they're going to be relying on a remote playout system, or they're going to be relying on a remote server, that may be a compressed library, and a mirrored copy of that library is uncompressed at the home studio. So it's just a matter of doing that. But cleaning up those assets, cleaning up your audio library, getting rid of files that don't need to be there. Case in point, the company that I used to work for many, many years has come to me recently, and I had to have a look at the audio library that was there, and I noticed that a lot of things that are in that audio library haven't actually been cleaned up since I was there. Because I used to be a real miser about this kind of stuff. At least once a month, I would take a list of dead and expired carts to somebody in the production department or an operator or somebody and say, come on, let's get this stuff out of here. Let's clean up the automation system, because it bogs down the resources when there's, when the database has to open up, 5,000 carts and only 500 of them are in use. Well, you're just slowing things down for no particular reason. So it's very important to clean that up. So, yep. So again, like I say, to sort of, to bring it back to where we started this conversation, our business is audio. Okay, so we want to strive for quality over convenience, and this is important that we do this throughout the entire chain. So if you've got somebody who says, "Oh, don't worry about it, I got a home studio. Yeah, I can lay down those tracks. I can record this for you." Let's find out what they're using. Are they using a broadcast microphone, or are they using a headset that they bought off of Amazon that, somebody told them was cool and cheap and sounds good? Are they adding any processing to that audio before they send it to you from their home studio? Because it used to be that the guys who did voice work, or were contract voices for, a number of different stations or outlets, made an effort to put in decent quality equipment at their home studio, microphones and processors and that kind of managed. I sure used to set those up for a lot of guys, but now, because it's all so inexpensive and it's all so readily available on the internet, and everybody is doing a podcast, there's so many differing opinions out there. So you may be getting bad audio. You may, and I'm not talking, again, we're not just talking about, live audio that's being streamed. We're talking recorded audio. We're talking product that's being put together by somebody remotely. So make sure that if you're not encouraging them to strive for good quality audio, explain it to them or provide them with the tools that they need. Microphones aren't that expensive, relatively speaking, and then how much processing is too much processing? Okay, so we're going to have this conversation now. We started out the webinar having this conversation, but let's have this conversation again.
So you knew we were going to circle around.
How much processing is too much processing? Okay, well, delivery platforms make a difference. AM versus FM, FM versus HD, radio versus streaming, codecs versus STLs. There are so many different places now where you have to worry about processing for the end user that it actually makes more sense to do less processing or almost no processing on everything before it hits that final output stage. And that's not to say don't use, mic processors, or, don't make sure that, there's some sort of, as I said earlier, some sort of compression coming out of a studio or whatever. But let's make sure that we're standardizing on that, and let's be cognizant of the fact that it is going to so many different places. There is nothing in the world I hate more than a bad sounding podcast that comes out of what should be a professional broadcast studio.
Right.
And it's simply because, hey, it's podcasting. Who cares? Here's some microphones. Yeah, here's the studio. Go ahead. Just just hit record, and we'll deal with it later. Well, no, we have to.
You see so many people doing, say, a Facebook reel where they're holding a lav mic like this, and it's like, just clip it to your shirt and carry on.
Yeah, the whole point of it is that it's supposed to sit here, not up here. Yeah. So it's critically important that we're smart about this, and that we engage the people who are making this content and teach them a little bit about how to make better audio. Like, okay, so I'm using my microphone today is an Audio Technica 2020 USB. I've had this microphone for years. I used to do it for doing voice tracking. I was voice tracking a show while I was still the DOE for a bunch of radio stations, and I never knew where I was going to be when I had to do my tracks for that week. Sometimes I did it in the cab of my pickup truck. Sometimes I did it in a hotel room. Sometimes I did it in the quietest room I could find in a transmitter site. And it's a great sounding microphone. But if I lean in here and get a little bit closer, wow, that audio starts to sound a lot better, and there's a lot more range to it, and you can hear things a little bit more clearly. So again, just that important message can get lost when people are not trained to do this stuff anymore. I mean, mic technique was something they used to teach us in college, if you can believe that. Like, they spent an entire week teaching us mic technique. Like, you think about that today, and it's ridiculous, but it was really important to know how different microphones responded to different audio and different rooms and different noise. So
some mics work better with some voices. So I'm going to jump into the questions because there's been a few of them come in.
Sure.
Keith's asking, is there available a basic inexpensive AGC software add-on to your automation or other automation? And so I'm going to
come up.
Well, it's the same old, good, fast, cheap, pick two.
Yeah. AGC is one of those things that can be done really well, but can also be done really badly. I'm a big fan of VSTs. If you have the ability to be able to drive any part of your audio chain through a computer, and it's as simple as just setting up a virtual audio cable or something like that to be able to route your input to your input to your output, or vice versa. VSTs are fantastic, and there's some really, really good ones on the market out there. So you could actually turn a computer into a processor to just very simply do that. There are no, that's not fair. They're finding a standalone AGC that you can use in a prosumer model is hard to come by. AGC is something that got built into AM and FM processors a million years ago, and so a standalone AGC itself kind of disappeared. So the quickest and easiest way and the best way to answer that question is VSTs, virtual cables on your laptop, your desktop, whatever machine that you're using. And I mean, you can even find some for tablets, and I know that Apple and Android both have things. I'm not going to give you a list in it of anything. If you want some advice on what I use, feel free to DM me or get in touch with Jeff, and he'll send up my contact information over to you.
So Mike wants to know what VST is.
It is a virtual studio tool. And essentially what a VST is, it's a plugin that creates an audio chain. So if you're using a DAW, digital audio workshop,
sort of like Voxmeter.
Yeah, it's similar to that. You know, the one that's probably most known in the industry is Stereo Tool. That's a VST that basically provides you with a signal processor, like an FM style signal processor that runs as an app on your computer.
Mm-hmm.
So it's taking hardware and turning it into a software application that, with a little bit of finesse, you can actually use almost in real time to provide processing. So I mean, there's VSTs out there that mimic everything from you know, from Neve compressors to you know, right up to modern day gear that you would spend hundreds or thousands of dollars on.
Right.
But now you can use a virtual tool.
So Bob's asked, I use non-DJB, he mentions the brand, but we won't call them out, automation. I'm getting an audible blip noise after some of the audio when it plays back in the system. Any thoughts what could cause this and how to fix it? So there you go.
Um,
There's a troubleshooting
how
question
much
for
how much time we got left here, Jeff?
you. None.
Okay,
Very
so
little.
I mean, it's dependent on so many different factors, but the first place that I would look would be your audio device. Um, the way that most automation systems work is the automation system has an audio DLL that then hands that off to Windows, which then hands that off to an audio device. So if your audio device is failing in any way, doesn't have enough bandwidth, your computer's slowing down, you know, maybe you're having network traffic issues, all of those things could affect the output. It's kind of hard to tell without listening to it. Something that we've noticed lately is I don't know why, but we've suddenly started seeing things defaulting, like Adobe Audition defaulting output files to 48K 32-bit. You know, most of our audio libraries are still 44.1 16-bit. You know, dating back to the CDs that they were originally ripped from. That was the standard for a long time. 48K is starting to become the standard. Anytime that you have to make a conversion from one piece of audio to another, there's the potential for the system to hang a little bit, and there's also the potential for a bit of audio product, because both Windows and your audio device now have to resample in order to be able to make the transition from 44.1 to 48K or vice versa. I hope
Well,
that answers that question.
he said he used 48K 16-bit, so, but same deal, whether the source material is all like that or not, up in the air.
Well, this is a whole other broad-reaching topic that
Yeah.
you know, is something that should be discussed when talking about digital audio these days. Is again, standardization is so important because we really are entering an era where there doesn't need to be so many different formats. There doesn't need to be so many different encoding frequencies. There doesn't need to be like it should be standardized throughout your chain, but there's also so many different places where things are being resampled, and not from a compression standpoint, but they're being resampled because it's going from, you know, the playout on your computer to you know, going through a digital audio AOIP system, and then from there it could be potentially being resampled again when it hits an output chain, like a codec or something. So it's important to make sure that you standardize as much as you can across the board. So
Right.
I hope
And
that
the
answers that
challenge
question.
Yeah, and the challenge with sample rate converters too is down conversion is easy. It's not hard to take bits out. Up conversion, it's harder to do that gracefully because putting the bits back is always questionable. Oh, and let's scroll. Ben had asked what mouse I liked. It's the Logitech MX Anywhere 2S. Just to put that on the
Who
record.
cares about sample rates? What mouse are you?
It's a tool,
What's your
man.
favorite
It's a
color,
tool.
Jeff?
What's that?
What's your favorite color?
Neutral. I don't, well, right now, obviously,
Beige.
Nautel blue. Nautel blue. So quick, just high speed through the operation, but synchronize is huge. I mean, I've got 5 clocks in the kitchen, and I can guarantee you, I never know what time it is.
Yeah, and it's not just so much synchronizing times, from again from a linear standpoint. It's more about making sure that all of the elements that go into creating the final output log in your playout system are all matched up. So one of the
Yeah,
things that we see a lot is the music department has a set of clocks that have breaks at a certain time. The traffic department have a bunch of clocks that have breaks at a certain time, and the automation system has a skeleton that has breaks at a certain time. And in a lot of cases, those three things don't match. So it's really important
right.
to sit everybody down in a room once in a while and go, okay, at 1 a.m. I have a break at 20 and I have a break at 50. How about you, traffic? Oh, well, I've got one at 21 and 48. Okay, well, can we line those up a little bit so that, at least the timing when the two things have to merge together are showing up properly? And it's incumbent upon engineers and technical people and IT people, the people who are responsible for managing and maintaining the system itself, to be the ones to take the lead on bringing everybody together. Something, again, that I
Right.
used to do a lot, where I would call a monthly meeting where I would sit down programming, music, traffic, operations, even some of the on-air talent, and say, okay, we're going to walk through all the steps that it takes to build our daily log, and let's make sure that everything's synchronized and put together.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And timing, or like you say at the bottom, cross training is key, so that somebody's there for backup.
Well,
All
and
right.
and so you kind of want to engage with everybody too, because they're the people who are using it. So you need to know what they know, and
Yeah,
make sure that they understand that even that little tiny bit of influence that they have over the system has wide-reaching effects.
right. Redundancy wise, I mean, that's again, how much backup will determine. It's situational. I mean, if you're in a position with, there is no such thing as too much backup until you get to the point where it's so complicated you can't find your backup.
Well, and that's it, right? So single points of failure rather than multiple points of failure. And Jeff, that line is in there as after a conversation that you and I and a couple of other people had, I think in Columbus last October, where you can build these incredibly beautifully redundant chains that look fantastic on paper, where no matter what, you've always got some piece of backup. But if one little point in that whole system fails, now you have to go and troubleshoot all of it. Whereas if
Right.
you just have one point of failure, it's really easy to come back and say, okay, that's what broke.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I mean, this is like everything else, the amount of redundancy you use. I mean, more and more, I've got a pretty healthy music library on this thing right here that I can patch into my radio station in
Sure.
a heartbeat if I have to. It's ugly and it sure won't be pristine, but
Well, I
you
mean,
know,
what's the most important thing? What's the most important thing? I mean, these are like cardinal rules that I've always followed throughout my broadcast career. Number one, no dead air. Okay.
yeah,
So that means no matter what, I've always got to make sure I've got a backup audio source. What's number two? Number two is make sure we're still making money. So it's really, really important to make sure that you have the ability to keep those commercials running, and that whoever is paying you money for the airtime is able to
yeah,
get their information to air at the time that they're supposed to. Just having a simple music backup doesn't cut it anymore. And there's
right.
lots of great systems out there, including some that we sell, that you can just set up at the transmitter site that just pick up your daily log. And as long as
Run
it's
with it.
getting fed
Right.
information once in a while, and it's the audio and the schedule is being updated, then that can be your last point of redundancy. Is if everything else fails, you've got an automation system plugged into the transmitter.
And that is a good point, talking to redundancy and operations, is make sure that somebody is tasked with regularly reviewing the backup audio source to keep the spot load current, or the underwriting statements if you're non-commercial,
Mhm.
or. All right, quick assessing needs, and we'll get wrapped up in the next couple of seconds.
Okay, sure. The industry is changing faster than technology can keep up with it. I mean, we're really it's starting to slow down a little bit. I mean, running into the pandemic, everything was about cloud, cloud, cloud. Small, 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 centralized, 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 and then the pandemic hit, and it was kind of like, oh, well,
Everybody's a remote
now
broadcaster.
we want everybody remote. So break up all that. So centralization's great, but we want everybody to be able to broadcast from anywhere. So it's really important that if you're looking at any new system, that you take into consideration what the goal of the organization is, not just today, but sort of long term. It doesn't mean that you have to, put a funny hat on and predict the future, but you need to be able to at least have some idea of where your organization is going. Asking questions. I mentioned earlier that the people who work in your organization are a huge resource for you. Find out what their pain points are, and get some ideas from them, because they may be able to tell you, in very simplistic terms, what it is that will make their life easier and make the system work better as a whole, that you may not take into consideration while you're busy worrying about, how much processing power you need and how big a hard drive you need and how much bandwidth you need to run it. Right. Don't follow the pack. Okay. Look, there's so many different options out there for so many different things. I'm not suggesting run off to my competition and buy from them, but at the same time, if there's something that makes more sense to you than buying from us, then, that's just you doing your homework. Not everybody has a single solution. Again, assess what you need in terms of automation and make your informed decisions once you've had a chance to sort of look around and talk to all the key stakeholders in that. Take risks, okay? Emerging technology is only emerging because somebody hasn't latched onto it and made it a standard, okay? So sometimes you're going to take a risk and you're going to fail. Sometimes you're going to take a risk and it's going to be a big winner. It's really up to us to make sure that we're trying that out. I know that the pressure is too great for us to be taking huge risks on things. And I know that the budgets are too small to be able to, just go out and say, I'm just going to buy this and give it a try and see what happens. But if we don't, then two things are going to happen. Number one, there's going to be absolutely no innovation in the industry because we're just going to keep building the same thing over and over again because nobody wants anything different. And number two, you're not going to be able to change the way that your organization does things if you continue to use the same processes over and over again.
Right.
Find partners. Nautel is a great example. I'm a huge fan of Nautel. I'm not being paid to say that. I'm just going to say it anyway. I standardized on Nautel transmitters a long time ago for one key reason. This is my previous life as a DOE. And it was because of their support and because I knew that no matter what, there was always going to be somebody who was knowledgeable on the other end of a phone that I could talk to, who was able to, provide me with the information that I and was good about it. Because it's, when you're in that position and it's 3 o'clock in the morning and your morning show starts an hour and a half later and you're off the air and your transmitter's not working, and no matter what you do and how much experience you have and how much knowledge you have and how much patience you have, your head is, the steam coming out of your ears. The person on the other end of the phone needs to be able to understand the position that you're in order to be able to support you. And it's important to find a partner who's going to be able to do that for you and not just somebody who's going to sit there and go, well, I can't really figure out what the problem is. Can you call back after 9 when so-and-so gets here? So, many companies are all too happy to take your money and then give you attitude instead of helping you with solutions. It's important to find people who have been in the shoes that you're in currently and understand that this isn't, my iPhone isn't working and I guess I can wait to, watch TikTok later. I need to be back on the air yesterday.
So on that note, we'll segue into a quick plug for some of your software stuff.
Why, thank you, Jeff. DJB Radio Software is a company that provides full solutions for broadcast automation. Everything from our DJB Zone Wide Area product, which is the one that you guys have heard a lot about lately, where we're looking to create a different kind of solution for people who are looking for automation to work in multiple markets. Radio Spider, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, which is kind of the industry standard for automated content retrieval. It is a very popular program and in use a lot of places. We have a logger that's so much more than a logger. We have our studio program that basically allows you to turn your laptop into a little studio. So if you're interested in talking about automation solutions, if you're interested in looking for something a little bit different than what everybody else is using, like I said, don't follow the pack. Do your research, find out. Just go ahead and reach out to us. We're online at djbradio.com, and if you want, you can email me anytime, adam@djbradio.com. And I thank you, Jeff and Nautel, for having me on today. I'm sorry that we've droned on so long. Give me a microphone and I'll talk forever.
There you go. So mandatory online information thing. Of course, this webinar, as with all our webinars, will be recorded and archived. Yes, you were recorded. The little red light's been on for the entire hour and a half. So you'll be seeing that on the archive as soon as Ed gets it up there. Shout out to Mr. Disembodied Voice, Ed Sylvester, who is the guy who makes the magic happen and manages to put up with me for
You're the
some
man,
reason.
Ed.
There you go. So on that note, folks, thanks for holy smokes, a whole bunch of you hung around the whole hour and a half. Really appreciate y'all. Thank you very much. And we'll be seeing you around over the next summer. I guess conference season's rolling up in a couple of weeks in Michigan. Here we go again. All right. Thank you very much, folks. Thank you, Adam. It's been a pleasure. See you next time, y'all. Bye.